Amid the escalation of the trade war between the United States and China, the global economic balance began to shift. With each new round of tariffs and sanctions, global production chains collapsed, and trade-dependent countries started searching for new ways to survive. Among them was Japan. Under growing pressure from Washington and declining exports of Japanese goods to China, voices in Tokyo calling for a reset of relations with Beijing grew increasingly louder. Just a few months ago, such a scenario seemed impossible, but step by step, quiet contacts began taking place between Tokyo and Beijing. According to Japan's Nikkei Asia, senior officials from both countries held informal consultations discussing the possibility of easing visa requirements for business delegations, expanding technological exchanges, and creating joint research funds in the energy sector. For China, this was a strategic opportunity, a chance to draw a U.S. ally, even partially, into its orbit. Within the Japanese government, there was a growing sense that American trade policy was becoming increasingly unpredictable. Trump's introduction of new tariffs on steel, electronics, and automobiles hit Japanese corporations hard. In response, some conservative politicians proposed seeking a temporary balance between Washington and Beijing by pursuing a more flexible line to protect Japan's economy. Beijing saw these signals as a window of opportunity. Chinese media began promoting the idea of a new era of Asian partnership, and several Chinese diplomats hinted that Beijing was ready to offer Japan special investment terms if it adopted a more neutral stance in the trade confrontation. However, during the same period, rumors began to circulate in Japanese political circles about pressure from American lobbyists and defense contractors concerned about a potential rapprochement between Tokyo and Beijing. Several analysts claimed that the United States was ready to offer Japan large-scale investment guarantees if it maintained its pro-Washington course. But those plans collapsed as quickly as they emerged. China made a series of moves that Tokyo perceived as direct humiliation. It began when Beijing suddenly announced restrictions on the export of rare earth metals, key components for Japan's microelectronics industry. The decision shocked Japan's industrial sector. Representatives of Sony, Panasonic, and Toyota stated that in the event of shortages of neodymium and terbium, production could drop by tens of %. For the new government of Sanai Takaichi, who had recently become Japan's first female prime minister and initially promoted economic dialogue with China, the move felt like a stab in the back. Almost simultaneously, incidents in the East China Sea began to increase. Japan's self-defense forces reported frequent intrusions by Chinese destroyers into waters near the Senkaku Islands, while Japanese Air Force jets scrambled in response to the approach of Chinese J-16 aircraft. According to Kyodo News, more than 20 such incidents were recorded in September alone, the highest number in the past 5 years. Tokyo viewed this not merely as a provocation, but as a show of force, and any notion of rapprochement became politically toxic. When media outlets began publishing flight maps and ship routes, Japanese public opinion shifted instantly. Newspapers such as Asahi Shimbun and Yomiuri ran sharp pieces about a new Chinese threat, while Prime Minister Takaichi's approval ratings rose for the first time, boosted by her tough rhetoric toward Beijing. Diplomatic sources began to say that the Chinese side had effectively destroyed the fragile bridge that could have formed the basis for future partnership. It was at that moment that Donald Trump stepped in. According to the Wall Street Journal, the White House began actively promoting the idea of strengthening the U.S.-Japan economic alliance to deny China even the slightest chance. At a recent public meeting between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Takaichi held in Tokyo, which drew enormous media attention, both sides demonstratively emphasized their strategic unity. Unlike previous closed-door formats, this meeting was as open as possible, with discussions covering major trade and defense agreements, including expanding Japan's access to U.S. energy markets, joint investments in semiconductor production, and strengthening military and political cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. However, as later became known, behind closed doors, the parties agreed to deepen not only military, but also economic, technological, and energy cooperation. According to sources cited by Reuters, the talks included plans to create joint ventures in defense technologies, coordinate supplies of critical resources, and even explore the potential integration of financial platforms for transactions between US and Japanese companies, a move that could directly affect China's interests. For China, this was a painful defeat. Analysts from the South China Morning Post noted that Beijing did not expect Tokyo to return so quickly to Washington's orbit, especially after months during which Chinese diplomacy had tried to build a softer approach by offering investments and economic incentives. But the harsh export restrictions and military maneuvers nullified those efforts. Today, no one in Tokyo is talking about rapprochement with China. On the contrary, Japanese media are discussing the possible deployment of new US missile defense systems in the south of the country and the accelerated construction of defense facilities on the Ryukyu Islands. According to NHK World, Takaichi's cabinet is also considering introducing additional export restrictions on Chinese dual-use technologies. Diplomatic insiders note that following the meeting with Trump, a new economic bloc began to take shape between the United States and Japan, intended to serve as a counterweight to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Washington is promising Tokyo investments, support, and expanded access to the US market in exchange for complete loyalty on matters of security and technology. Experts point out that Japan's pivot toward the United States was not merely a reaction to Chinese provocations, but part of a much broader process unfolding in the global economy. In a world where Washington and Beijing have effectively divided the planet into two technological zones, Tokyo faced a choice: remain a mediator between the two systems or become a full member of the Western Bloc. In the end, Takaichi chose stability and long-term protection, even at the cost of losing part of Japan's economic autonomy. Meanwhile, increasingly alarming assessments are being voiced in Beijing. Chinese analysts warn that the strengthening of the US-Japan bloc will accelerate a technological divide in Asia, forcing each country to choose a side. In China, concerns are also growing that Japan will become not just an economic partner of the United States, but a key participant in its defense strategy, especially given plans for joint production of missile defense systems and next-generation anti-ship missiles. International observers note that Japan's current course is already reshaping the structure of regional alliances. Whereas China was previously the main driver of economic growth in Asia, more and more countries now view Japan as a pillar of stability and an example of resilience amid global turbulence. After years of trying to balance between Washington and Beijing, Tokyo has made its final choice, setting a new trajectory for all of East Asia. Amid growing pressure from China and the weakening of global supply chains, Japan decided to act preemptively, strengthening its alliance with the United States not only in defense, but also in key areas of the economy, from energy to microchips. Thus, China truly had a historic opportunity to shift the balance of power in Asia, but that opportunity was lost due to its own mistakes and miscalculations. Restrictions on rare earth metals, demonstrative incursions into Japanese waters, and excessive pressure amid the trade war did their work. Japan has definitively chosen its side, and now, as a new axis is once again forming on the global stage, Washington-Tokyo, Beijing remains isolated, and its diplomatic maneuvers are increasingly turning into strategic missteps.